Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and AP English, and we turn now in our study to the great Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, often referred to as the Brothers K, and especially we're going to look at the Grand Inquisitor poem, which is what Ivan will call it, so we will call it a poem as well. Now, right away, I want to pay special tribute to the great Dennis Dalton of Barnard College, Columbia. His insights into this passage have I think helped a number of us in terms of how we read such a compelling novel as Brothers K, more particularly this special passage within the novel itself. Now in this lecture, I'm not going to really be lecturing on the Brothers K. I'm going to be paying particular attention to the Grand Inquisitor poem. Now, we have done our study of Plato and the Republic. We have spent some time there. Obviously at learnstrong.net you can find those other lectures. And now we're going to turn to maybe one of the greatest critiques of the notion of escape from freedom. The great Erich Fromm's book will come to mind immediately. Let's talk a little about Dostoevsky. Born in 1821, he will die in 1881, and he will publish as his last great tribute to his life's work, the Brothers Karamazov in 1880. I mean, just think about that date, 1880. Thoreau's Walden, a text, of course, that we love, 1854, it's published. Whitman's Leaves of Grass a year later in 1855. So something was happening in that 30 or so years between 1850 and 1880, which is truly compelling. Now, Brothers K is written by Dostoevsky as amazing life story. He ends up politically in a mess. He ends up actually at the firing squad, and at the last second is released from his execution by the Tsar. He finds himself in prisons in Siberia, and out of that experience comes the great novels, Crime and Punishment, another classic of our AP curriculum, and then here the Brothers Karamazov. Now we will turn to the Brothers K and say just very briefly that it's a story about a debauched father who is in all ways about the worst imaginable person that Plato would ever want to describe as the opposite of his ideal individual. You remember in Republic he made this observation that men will decline in Book 8 of Republic, in the declension of state discussion, that men will decline and ultimately become that democratic and then finally tyrannical individual. Well, in Brothers K we definitely have this type of individual as the father. He has 4 sons, and the 4 sons in many ways are going to be an interesting case study of the very ideas that Plato will play with as being different kinds of individuals. For our study, however, we're interested in 2 of the brothers. We have as the older of the 2 brothers, Ivan. Now Ivan is much, in many ways, like his father. He's kind of a carefree debauch, as well as he's highly, highly intelligent. And he is going to present in the Grand Inquisitor poem an argument that will be deeply disturbing to all readers on all political sides of the spectrum. His brother that he's making this argument to is the young Alyosha. Now Alyosha is in many ways the protagonist of our novel. He wants to be a good person. He wants to somehow escape the curse of his family, and he wants to become a priest. And it will be Alyosha, who is young, who is in many ways idealistic, who wants to believe in the Christian faith, who will come up against the Scylla and Charybdis, if we can call it, of Ivan's argument, escape from freedom. Now, to begin this reading, there is some assumptions that Dostoevsky will make, and one of those is that you're familiar with the story of Christ's and his famous temptation with the devil. Now, if you don't know this passage from the book of Matthew and the Gospels, then much of the reading here is going to be lost on you. So we want to go there. Now, this Matthew 4 passage you've heard already from us if you've already worked through Milton's Paradise Regained lectures at learnstrong.net, where we began as well, because I think in many ways Dostoevsky is drawing heavily on the ancient traditions, not only biblical, but as well Greek and, of course, Miltonic as well. Now, in the same way, that we had just finished studying the dialogues of Plato, we're going to have Dostoevsky playing as well with the dialogue form. But he's going to almost one-up, if you can do it, one-up Plato. And the way he's going to do it is he's going to have Ivan having a conversation with Alyosha. And Alyosha is going to periodically interrupt the discussion in the same ways that when we study Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Marlowe will be telling a story and then there will be interruptions. Or in Conrad's O Youth, another story of our curriculum, where there's this interruption. But at the same time, in Ivan's story, or poem, or parable, or allegory, to use the language of Plato, we're going to have two interlocutors. The first will be inexplicably Jesus Christ. No, he returns, he comes back. He comes back at a somewhat inopportune time. He comes back to Seville during the terrible Inquisition, when lots and lots of people are being burned at the stake and stuff like that. There will be a second interlocutor, and this will be the Grand Inquisitor, namely the person who's doing all of the killing in the name of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, Alyosha, to be fair, is training to be an Orthodox, as in Russian Orthodox priest, and so he'll have a comment or two that is somewhat negative or pejorative towards the Church of Rome. But I think that we'll be able to figure out the dialogue format here, and it is a dialogue within a larger novel itself, which you could qualify almost as a Platonic dialogue itself. So Dostoevsky's playing all kinds of interesting games, but standing behind all of the poem that we'll be studying now. And our goal is to apply the Platonic critique of especially the cave allegory to our reading here of this poem. But to be able to do that, you have to know the passage from Matthew 4. I'll be reading from the King James Bible, as we always do in 303. Anytime we reference the Bible, we always read from the classic 1611. Obviously, I've given lectures already on the 1611 King James Version of the Bible and why it's such a significant translation for us. Then, I'm just now reading. Then was Jesus led of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. When he fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward a-hungered. When the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It's written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, It's written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again the devil taketh him up into an exceedingly high mountain, and showeth him all of the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it's written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. Now, from this passage, we move now to the Brothers K, and we are in really what is the most powerful moment in the Brothers K. We are in chapter 5, at the Grand Inquisitor chapter, and here we are going to meet Ivan and Alyosha. Now, Ivan has been asking the theodicy question from a multiplicity of perspectives. You'll remember our big five in 303. What does the text say about, by the way, we're going to see a lot of this, all of the big five, but what does this text say about epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who we are, psychology, the motivations of the individual mind, sociology, the study of groups, and we're going to have a lot to say about that in this passage. And then finally, the theodicy question, that is to say, why is there evil in this world? And Ivan will make the argument that the theodicy question, why is there evil in a world created by an all-powerful, all-loving deity, is in fact the end of the belief in God. And he uses several examples that Dostoevsky actually draws directly from newspapers. A small young girl of 5 who wets her bed and for it is punished by her parents by being left out in an outhouse all the evening through the night, freezing to death, screaming and crying for some relief, and it never comes. And Ivan makes the observation, This clearly, I mean, if you need any evidence for the belief there is no God, this is clearly it. But then he makes an observation about a poem that he's been working on, and he'd like to share it with Alyosha. He has a few preliminary observations, and then he's ready to get to the actual story itself. Now, what I want to do with you is I just want to read this with you. I'll be working with the Constance Garnett translation, and it's available for you at Learn Strong there in our AP list. So if you want to follow along, you should be following along with that reading. And what I want to do is I just want to read this dialogue with you. I mean, it's a poem of some profound insights, and then we'll periodically pause and make our observations at levels 2 and 3. Obviously, at level 1, we're working what does the text say. At level 2, what does the text mean? 2A, messages and themes. 2B, not what Dostoevsky says, but how he says it. And then finally, at level 3, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way, since we are going to write on the relationship between these ideas and the Platonist ideas from the cave allegory of Republic 7. Again, the assumption is that you're already familiar with our ideas there. You can find those lectures as well at learnstrong.net in the AP folder, as well as in the Harvard Classics folder. And then finally, and I think most profoundly for Dostoevsky, because he does challenge us. I mean, I'm sometimes asked, what is up with your belief in these stories being so important? As we say in 303, we are the stories we tell and retell. We're the stories we accept. We're also the stories we reject. And I think a whole lot of that accepting and rejecting is thrown down for us in this poem. But I think a text like this is going to try to answer some very difficult and disturbing questions about the 20th and now the 21st century. How can you explain the gulags? How can you explain the death camps? How can you explain Auschwitz? How can you explain Mao's death camps or the Cambodian killing fields? And I think that this passage here has a whole lot to say about what it means when we give up our freedom and we decide to let the tyrannical or the despotic leader or leaders tell us what to do and what to think. I'll begin now with the story itself. Ivan is speaking. He says, "My story is laid in Spain, in Seville, in the most terrible time of the Inquisition, when fires were lighted every day to the glory of God, and in the splendid auto de fe, the wicked heretics were burned." He puts quotation marks around it. "Oh, of course, this was not the coming in which he will appear, that is to say Christ, according to his promise at the end of time in all his heavenly glory, in which will be sudden as lightning flashing from east to west. No, he visited his children only for a moment, and there where the flames were crackling around the heretics. In his infinite mercy, Ivan is the king of satire. He's the king of irony. So every adjective, infinite mercy here, is going to be for us sardonic. It's going to be sarcastic, right? He came once more among men in that human shape in which he walked among men for 33 years, 15 centuries ago. He came down to the hot pavements of the southern town. And immediately when you get this, he came down, we've obviously got the coming down from heaven, but we got the opening lines of Republic, don't we? I went down to the Piraeus, and of course we're also thinking about our Dante as we play this game as well, right? His journey into Inferno. He came down to the hot pavements of the southern town, in which on the day before almost 100 heretics had, at Majorium Gloriam Dei, been burnt by the cardinal, the Grand Inquisitor. Of course, this will be a key speaker in our dialogue in a moment. In a magnificent auto de fe, in the presence of the king, the court, the knights, the cardinals, the most charming ladies of the court, notice charming here, and the whole population of Seville. He came, this is now Christ, he came softly, unobserved, and yet, strange to say, everyone recognized him. So when Christ shows up, it's as if somehow everyone knows who he is again. That might be one of the best passages in the poem. Ivan says, he's sharing this for the first time with Alyosha, almost like, what do you think of it, right? I mean, why they recognized him? The people are irresistibly drawn to him. They surround him, they flock about him, follow him. He moves silently in their midst with a gentle smile of infinite compassion. The sun of love burns in his heart, light and power shine from his eyes, and their radiance shed on the people stirs their heart with responsive love. He holds out his hands to them, blesses them, and a healing virtue comes from contact with them, even with his garments. An old man in the crowd, blind from childhood, cries out, "O Lord, heal me, and I shall see thee." And as it were, scales fail from his eyes, and the blind man sees him. And we have to pause here and think, of course, of our Plato and the power of sight, perspicacity, as we've called it, insight. And we also have to think, of course, about Walden and Thoreau's classic notion of we must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn. Of course, Thoreau is going to posit that idea in Walden of escape to freedom, as of course Christ will posit as well. Here we'll have Ivan in his view that this is not really what humans want. What humans want is the escape from fear and freedom. Freedom is the worst imaginable place to be. But here, notice, Christ will heal the blind. The crowd weeps and kisses the earth under his feet. Children throw flowers before him, sing and cry, Hosanna. It's he, all repeat. It must be he. It can be no one but him. He stopped at the steps of the Seville Cathedral at the moment when the weeping mourners are bringing in a little open white coffin. In it lies a child of 7, the only daughter of a prominent citizen. And of course we have stories like this in the Gospels, but Ivan has also been translating a story for Alyosha of terrible death, especially the pain and suffering of children. For Ivan, that's the theodicy question that's most problematic. As we have said in other lectures, the child who is lying in a bed in the Denver Children's Hospital, and you are speaking with the mother, and the mother says, I wish there was a God powerful enough to cure my daughter's leukemic cancer and her pain. Oh, there is a God powerful enough. Oh, well, if there's a God powerful enough, that God must not be very kind. Oh, no. That God is all-loving and wants nothing more than your daughter to be cured of cancer. Well, as we put it on our whiteboard in a triangle, if at the lower left corner of the triangle it is that daughter dying of leukemia, call it pain, call it suffering, call it what you will. And at the other two corners of the triangle, we put an all-powerful and an all-loving deity. Then the obvious question is, how do you explain the fact that the child's dying of cancer if there is an all-powerful and all-loving deity? This will be Ivan's question, especially as it relates to the pain of children, right? And all of that. Well, here we have a dead child, okay? The dead child lies hidden in flowers. He will raise your child, the crowd shouts to the weeping mother. The priest, coming to meet the coffin, and of course this will be the moment, right, looks perplexed and frowns, but the mother of the dead child throws herself at his feet with a wail. If it is thou, raise my child, she cries, holding out her hands to him. The procession halts. The coffin is laid on the steps at his feet. He looks with compassion, and his lips once more softly pronounce, Maiden, arise. This is, of course, again, because this is a story that is told in the Gospels. And the maiden arises. The little girl sits up in the coffin. By the way, the fact that the lips are mentioned of Christ will come back as a powerful symbol at 2b for us here in a bit. The little girl sits up in the coffin, looks around, smiling with wide open, wondering eyes, holding a bunch of white roses they put in her hand. There are cries, sobs, confusion among the people. And at that moment, the cardinal himself, the Grand Inquisitor, passes by the cathedral. Now we're going to meet, we've met Christ, one of the two interlocutors in this famous dialogue. Now we're going to meet the Grand Inquisitor. He's an old man, almost 90, tall and erect, with a withered face and sunken eyes in which there is still a gleam of light. Now this gleam of light is going to be a powerful reference already. He's not dressed in his gorgeous cardinal's robes as he was the day before when he was burning the enemies of the Roman Church. At this moment he's wearing his coarse old monk's cassock. At a distance behind him come his gloomy assistants and slaves and the holy guard. He stops at the side of the crowd and watches it from a distance. He sees everything. He sees them set the coffin down at his feet, sees the child raise up, and his face darkens. He knits his thick gray brows and his eyes gleam with a sinister fire. Now, Dostoevsky's writing this hurriedly to be able to make, because he lived all his life pretty much in poverty and he was trying to hurry to get the parts of this novel out so that he could get paid. It is compelling how beautifully constructed this passage is, clearly inspired, no question, as he's writing this. We think about Shakespeare and Dostoevsky as being these inspired writers. They don't just get lucky, it's genius, right? So notice we've got the sinister fire, and we think about the fire of Plato's cave allegory, no question, right? That fire in the cave and all of that. He holds out his finger and bids the guards take him, obviously Christ. And such is his power, so completely are the people cowed into submission and trembling obedience to him, that the crowd immediately makes way for the guards, and in the midst of death-like silence they lay hands on him and lead him away. The crowd. Now, of course, this is going to be a study of sociology in large measure. This crowd. Who is this crowd? And we'll have to think about things like Miller's Crucible and any number of titles that will play the game of this crowd, right? You'll remember that Machiavelli says in The Prince, he who builds on the people builds on mud. Pretty sardonic view, and of course it's as well the view of Hobbes and his Leviathan of what people really are. But notice the crowd here. They allowed this to happen. They just witnessed the raising of this child, and now they're ready to stand by. The crowd instantly bows down to the earth like one man. Now this notion of the crowd as one man will be a powerful returning motif here in a bit. Before the old Inquisitor, he blesses the people in silence and passes on. The guards lead their prisoner to the closed, gloomy, vaulted prison in the ancient palace of the Holy Inquisition and shut him in it. Now, let's just put it in our notes, obviously, when we're working in 3a and our comparison to other titles, especially because we're working with Plato's cave allegory. Notice where they take him. Down into the dungeon, down into the cave we go, and that's where Jesus Christ will be locked up, right? The day passes and is followed by the dark, burning, breathless night of Seville. The air is fragrant with laurel and lemon. In the pitch darkness of the iron door of the prison is suddenly opened, and the Grand Inquisitor himself comes in with light in his hand. All right, so notice every time we have a mention of light, it's fascinating. He is alone. The door is closed at once behind him. He stands in the doorway and for a minute or two gazes into his face. At last he goes up slowly, sets the light on the table, and speaks. Now, with the exception of a few moments when Alyosha is going to interrupt Ivan to try and figure out exactly what's going on, we think of Glaucon interrupting Socrates several times in the course of the dialogue. We think obviously as well of Thrasymachus. We cannot miss this, all right? Dostoevsky is clearly playing games with his Plato in Republic. So we've got a very Thrasymachon-like presence in this Grand Inquisitor. And now we have the famous meeting between the most powerful man